Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Wednesday, the Change Leadership episode, this week with Keir Lumsden. Hey, Keir, welcome back.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to today. I've got a great psychological study to throw in.
All right, well, let's dive into it right away. Of course, we're talking about change, and we want to hear a story of a change process you were involved with. Walk us through the process, how it went from beginning to end. And then as you go through that process, highlight those tools, tricks, tips, techniques you learned back then that you still apply today.
Yeah, I mean, I may subvert expectations slightly with my response because part of this experience was one of failure again. But ultimately, what was failure in the short term was success in the long term. So a few years ago, I worked with a team that was looking to deliver a community app, something that would harness the power of connecting people around a shared interest on a particular platform. And the idea was to kind of use this concept of the network effect to grow after being initially seeded with content which would take root and grow into something bigger. The reason for all the gardening puns there is that was the intended audience, those with green fingers. So we had a small team. We were aiming to create something from scratch. We were initially focusing on the simplest solution we could. Bearing in mind this was prior to the changes made to the 2020 Scrum Guide, we set ourselves a medium-term goal for the product, which would be now known as the product goal. And we focused on achieving that goal together through a series of sprint goals. We really focused on harnessing the different skills and experiences of the group to achieve that goal together. They were awesome people who had an enthused vision and people-focused product owner, a UX specialist, a brilliant designer, an inspired senior developer.
So you had all the roles you needed.
Oh yeah, we had all of the roles, all the skills. We had a quality analyst who could influence like few others, and we had a great cohesive unit. But what was great and what was the example of the change that we were trying to bring to the organization was that no one was bigger than the team. We were in this together and we were always looking to jump in and help each other no matter what was involved. And we got something into our production environment and quickly and iterated on it to the point of the PO being ready to start seeding content and trial the brand. At the same point, there was the difficult decision made by the organization to redirect the funding from that team to another part of the organization. So none of what we produced truly ever saw the light of day, which is disappointing. And did we learn something about deploying and getting something out to our users arguably too late? Yes, we did.
No matter how early you think you're delivering, you should deliver earlier.
Absolutely. I once worked with a product director who said, if you're not ashamed about your first offering, you've released too late. But would all of that have made a difference to the end result? Arguably no.
Well, you don't know, right? Because that's and it doesn't matter for the story. Because whatever happens in practice cannot be predicted. Like you need to actually do it to see the feedback and the take up that the application would get. But I think that we can safely say that even though we might be thinking we're releasing early, if something like this happens, right, that the company takes money away and puts it into some other project, you can actually literally say that no matter how early you thought it was still too late.
The irony of all of this was that the handsome, clever person who made the argument for the changing of funds or the additional funds in another area was me. So I accidentally removed funding from one of my teams by making an argument for on another. But ultimately, we learned an awful lot about the value of focus, pairing, alignment around goals, and sharing skills of experience. That was fabulous. And the foundations of that team became another team in the organization. And that was one that became a standard bearer for collaboration. And it demonstrated to other teams what was possible. It demonstrated the way to do things. So this was an example of a catalyst for cultural change. So if a culture is behaviors and actions that we do instinctively, this was a demonstration of a team culture that influenced other teams. And it created that change across the organization by showing what was possible and acting like there was a problem with the way things were happening and working towards a solution to better them, to solve them.
But when you say working towards a solution, I'm not sure I understand. Do you mean like that team was supposed to be selling a new way of working to the rest of the organization? Or was it rather that through their actions and, of course, their success, they became naturally an example for other teams?
It's very much the latter, yeah. And it's simply that team recognized that there was a better way. And instead of just talking about it, just did it. And this is the study I kind of was going to make reference to, is that there's in fact there are people who I work with are probably sick of me making references to this, but there was a paper on climate change which referenced a psychological study neatly summed up in the quote, people don't come running because they hear others shouting fire, they follow when people run in with buckets of water. And the message that effectively in that is quite simple, is that change doesn't come out of nowhere, neither does collaboration. Someone needs to act like it's a problem and that we could do better, and then demonstrate it by doing it. And it requires us to remember that change is needed by acting like change is needed. And that creates something in our brain that says, do you know what? I'm going to keep doing this because I remember why I'm doing it. And I remember the reasons for making this change and the reasons for my actions.
I really like that perspective, because it can also be applied to our day-to-day work. Very often when we talk about change, we talk about models that are developed, perspectives, studies, just like what you said. But change happens on the day-to-day. Like, no matter how complex or simple a model of change is, the change that happens actually happens in practice, right? And what you're saying, if I understand you correctly, is that one very practical way to make change happen is to not talk about it, but just do it, in the sense of showing the example, showing that sense of urgency, right? Acting like there is a problem that needs to be fixed, and then doing something about it. And of course, not being shy to talk about what you have done, but do it first, talk about it later.
Yeah, and the study that I referred to goes on to kind of say that actually there's evidence that we don't have to wait for systems, like bigger systems, to change in order for our smaller things to change. Is that and the expectation sometimes can be that, oh well, like what I do by changing will be relatively small in impact, and actually the bigger thing over here is the thing that needs to change first. Actually, by doing things ourselves, it makes systems change, and systems are more likely to change if people make change at a lower level. So yeah, remember to act like change is needed will help us make change, and will help others make change as well. And a change that affects an organization starts with a small group of people ultimately.
Absolutely. And it always starts locally before it goes global.
Absolutely. And the interesting thing is we use the phrase organization without thinking what it means. It means people have organized themselves in a certain way around doing something in a particular way. And to change that, it means sometimes you have to reorganize.
Absolutely.
So to reorganize organizations, you need to make change. And demonstrating it can be done at a small level is sometimes where you need to begin, because then people will start to recognize that there's a problem, and then recognize that there's a need for that change.
Starting at the small will definitely create the, if nothing else, the example that the large can follow. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Keir.
Absolute pleasure.
Leading change is one of the core skills we must acquire. but it is only one of the steps towards our success as Scrum Masters. Tomorrow, on Success Thursday, we will talk about how to define success for the Scrum Master role. We'll cover tips on how to measure your way to that position, and most importantly, how to develop that focus on continuous improvement that is as important for Scrum Masters as it is for teams. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.